In my previous two videos, I discussed the possibility of a quasi-legislative body whose only power would be to veto unconstitutional bills. They would be selected by lottery rather than by our corrupt election system. They'd be selected from a pool of citizens qualified by training and a civil service exam focused on the Constitution. They would be unlobbyable, anonymous, protected by the Secret Service, in a sense sequestered, and receiving a stipend for their term. In this video, I'd like to touch on the possible implications of this arrangement, this screening of bills for their constitutionality, rather the screening of all bills for their constitutionality subsequent to their signing by the President. As it is now, laws only receive this review by the judicial branch if challenged in court, and selectively, but under this jury system, all bills signed into law would receive it by regular citizens who are not in the big club and have no financial incentive other than protecting themselves and the public from exploitation by wealthy and foreign interests who control practically all of our elected officials and bureaucrats. As it stands now, there's a disconnect between the will of the people and the legislative bodies that has intensified since the Citizens United verdict. Unlimited money in politics has put our government up for sale to the highest bidder in both elections and primaries. Only sponsored candidates can make it to the ballot for a major party, as evidenced by recent events in Kentucky and our engagement in an unwanted war in the Middle East, and in fact our foreign policy for the last, 30 years. So the most obvious effect of this proposed arrangement is that it introduces real financial risk for those who would purchase political influence through the coefficient of corruption by which their private money is converted into public power. Every bit of legislation they purchase would be subject to review by regular citizens they could not buy, influence, or even identify, and thus their investment could instantly be flushed down the toilet if the average citizen, in looking at it objectively, deemed it to be against the public interest. I speculate that it would be an effective screen against money's corrupting influence to the extent that it would effectively block all such legislation, completely nullifying the incentive to purchase political influence. It would destroy the lobbying motive. Money could own every politician, and yet every bill they attempted to purchase into law could be swatted down by citizens who cannot be influenced by money. It would change the landscape of campaign finance, and it would end the gravy train that is the holding of public office, which attracts so many psychopaths. It would equate to demand destruction for the purchasing of politicians, changing the incentives to even become politicians, and thus changing the caliber of persons seeking office. The Founding Fathers created the checks and balances that we have to prevent concentrations of power, but over the quarter millennia of this republic, moneyed interests have found ways to undermine them, culminating in Citizens United, which effectively stole the government and disconnected it from the will of the people. A jury system to nullify purchased legislation would destroy the coefficient by which private money is turned into public power. At first, the status quo would persist for a time, that is, this marketplace for politicians. But as each one of their pet bills became nullified by constitutional jury, the return on investment would approach zero, and thus the lobbying would have to stop for lack of efficacy, leaving legislators to live on just the salary given to them by the job and whatever asset income they brought with them to office. They would not be able to benefit from insider trading, as their investments would crash with the scrapping of each piece of legislation that would have otherwise been a boon to them. Like, they know what stocks are going to benefit from their legislation, and they front run that. But their investments wouldn't do as well after that said legislation was torn down. They wouldn't be able to accumulate fortunes from insider trading. Quite the opposite. They would instead lose fortunes in rug pulls, as their corrupt laws were nullified by citizens with no stake in the matter, or no upside stake in the matter. Jury members would be subject to insider trading laws that currently apply to the public at large to maintain the integrity of the system. So with the end of the ability to buy legislation, campaign finance would return to grassroots, and politics would cease to be an avenue for the gathering of wealth and power, which would increase the moral caliber of those seeking office. Public servants would have no incentive to run for office beyond the intrinsic benefit of serving their fellow citizens, It would also decrease the legal complexity of our system, as demand destruction for privately financed laws would decrease the number of laws in general. Initially, there would need to be a jury review of all laws on the books and an examination of the private influence exerted on their elected sponsors. Many pieces of privately financed legislation would be nullified in this process, massively decreasing the complexity of our legal system and pulling us away from the brink of societal collapse by complexity that's theorized by Joseph Tainter. This reduction in complexity in privately sponsored legislation that precipitates so much public spending could also bring us closer to a balanced budget. It would also bring our foreign policy in line and stop all these foreign adventures currently precipitated by foreign interests who have also purchased influence in our government. Taking the money out of politics would put money back into the taxpayer's pocket. The whole monetary system would have to change, though, as our debt-based system of fiat could possibly collapse in such a reduction of government spending. As it is now, the money supply has to keep growing, or else the system collapses, and a massive reduction in government spending could pop that bubble. There would need to be an addressing of this with an asset-based currency versus a debt-based one. Under the current system, the current debt-based system, when money is created through credit, only the principal is lent into existence, not the interest that's ultimately going to need to be paid back from dollars that would have to be subsequently created by other loans. The current system is like a pyramid scheme. It has to keep growing. We would have to unravel this pyramid scheme of fiat money without creating another Great Depression. We are approaching a transition point into chaos as we reap the consequences of our foreign policy, having been in the hands of foreign agents for so long, as well as our monetary policy being in the hands of a central bank that's privately owned. We will be facing a societal collapse in the near future that has been brought to us by the corruption that's been the topic of so many videos on this channel. In the aftermath of that collapse is the opportunity to use the ensuing outrage to clearly point to its source in corruption and the lack of checks and balances against it to establish this check and balance going forward. It takes just one election of a grassroots purge party to take a sufficient portion of seats in both houses to overcome a presidential veto and establish the constitutional jury. From there, the incentives to inject money into politics for unconstitutional ends will be gone, as will the incentives for the pipeline that grooms and finances the psychopath puppets who now occupy the halls of power. The people will once again regain control of the government and destroy the business case for buying politicians, as every bit of corrupt legislation gets smacked down by the non-elite, non-big club members of the public, who would gain the final word in what becomes law. So, this channel has about 10 viewers, so I don't expect it will be a catalyst for something like this, but maybe some influencer. It would have to be like a blitzkrieg of influencers pushing such an idea in the face of national collapse, because once it was understood by the people who control the platforms, they would shut it down. So word would have to get out to basically vote for no major parties and only those who would support such a system. Anyway, pie in the sky stuff. That's all for now.